Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you're finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So in today's edition of my 240ToWin series, we're going to be talking about the state of Utah, and we need to put it in the state to watch category here on my 240ToWin map of all of these states, dividing them up in categories of safe Republican and Democrat states, where there were no competitive primaries, and there will be no competitive elections happening in November in those states. You have the battleground states, of which we haven't talked about any yet, but those will be coming soon in the future. And then you have the states to watch, which are states that are not toss-ups with tons of close races, but that instead do have at least some competitive races in the primary or in the general election in November. Whether it be Mississippi, which has been closer than people think it is at the presidential level in recent years, so that will be interesting to watch the margin on election night between Trump and Biden. Alabama, where there is a competitive House race this year, after a lawsuit unfortunately created a more Democrat seat that Republicans are trying to hold. And in North Dakota, there were competitive primaries at the governor and House level, neither of which totally were positive results for conservatives, but we at least got somewhat of an upgrade for the House. And then we have Utah, which is added to the list in today's video, because there are many competitive primaries happening this Tuesday in the state. Even though there will be no competitive races in November in Utah, it's a very safe Republican state. Therefore, the primaries are very important to see what kind of Republicans, rhinos, or actual conservatives get nominated for different offices, because those nominees for the Republicans are basically guaranteed to go on to win. And Utah is an odd state politically. It's very much a more rhino, moderate Republican state. Obviously, Mitt Romney is a senator from there. You also do have Mike Lee, who is a solid conservative, as the other senator, but it's definitely not the most conservative of all the red states in the country. But hopefully that can change in the primaries on Tuesday for at least some races. First, looking to the Republican primaries for the House of Representatives. In the 1st District, we have Blake Moore, the incumbent there. He's a really big rhino, a moderate Republican, more of a liberal Republican. He voted to form the January 6th Commission along with the Democrats in the House. He voted against impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas, the infamous member of the Biden administration responsible for the border crisis. He supported Liz Cheney, and he was one of the few Republicans to cross over and vote with Democrats to pass the Respect for Marriage Act, which does the opposite of what it says and codified same-sex marriage into federal law. He is a complete disgrace, and his challenger is Paul Miller. He's literally listed here as an electrician, so never held political office before, it would seem. And he's obviously a long shot against Blake Moore. We can see he's raised very little money and spent just about $6,000 compared to Blake Moore, having raised almost $2 million and spent over $1 million. But ironically, Paul Miller actually won the convention vote for the state Republican Party, beating out Blake Moore by 10 points. But you have to understand that Utah is a weird system. They have a non-binding convention where just the lower finishing candidates are eliminated and do not go on to the primary. But whoever wins the convention is not the nominee. It still goes to a primary where the voters decide and have the final say for the nominee. And unfortunately, the Utah Republican Party, as far as the delegates that vote in the convention, are actually pretty based, and they're very conservative. And usually you see the most conservative candidate for a race get the most votes and be the number one finisher. Unfortunately, Utah voters seem to be much more moderate, much more neoconservative, because they tend to vote for more liberal, moderate, rhino-esque Republicans, aka Romney is one of their senators. So I do not expect Paul Miller to pull out the upset. I expect Blake Moore to really comfortably win the nomination. I obviously would take my chances with a political outsider over Blake Moore, who has been very underwhelming. So this will obviously be an interesting race to watch and see what the results are. Over in the 2nd District for Utah, we have the incumbent Celeste Malloy, who was recently elected in a special election back in 2023 to this seat. So she has not been in Congress very long. Her challenger is Colby Jenkins, another political outsider and a military veteran. Just like Blake Moore, Celeste Malloy also lost the convention for her race, 57-43 against Jenkins. And unlike Blake Moore's challenger, Colby Jenkins has a much more realistic path to victory. He has a lot more backing and a lot more support from Rand Paul and Mike Lee in the Senate. Vivek Ramaswamy has endorsed him. He has the backing of the Utah Republican State Party, and the House Freedom Caucus is funding him. So he is definitely racking up support and has a ground game in the district. Celeste Malloy, meanwhile, has the backing of Donald Trump, another unfortunate endorsement by him. Malloy is not the worst. She's not as bad as Blake Moore, but she's really pretty average, and someone like Jenkins would be a big conservative upgrade over her, so it's disappointing that Trump passed over that opportunity to give him a boost. She also has the endorsement of Blake Moore, so that's kind of a negative thing, which I would not have expected since the House Freedom Caucus, which he is a member of, has endorsed Jenkins, as I mentioned. And if we look at the fundraising numbers in this race, Jenkins is actually doing pretty well. He's raised almost $400,000, spent almost $300,000 funding his campaign in this race, and Celeste Malloy has spent over $1.2 million, so more than 4 times what he has spent, but he's still keeping up impressively well with the incumbent in this race. All things point to this being a possible upset and definitely a race to keep an eye on that might be closer than some people expect, and hopefully one that Jenkins can pull off, although it would be a higher chance of that happening if Trump had backed him. But we'll have to see. And finally, in the 3rd district, we have an open seat. John Curtis, the current incumbent of this seat, is retiring to run for the Senate. We'll get into him in a minute. And there are 5 Republican candidates that are running in the primary. There also were some that were eliminated at the convention, as we can see here. And looking to those results, we can see that Mike Kennedy won the final round with over 61% of the vote. And he is the most conservative candidate in this race. He definitely would be a solid upgrade over John Curtis. And looking at the endorsements of the race, Mike Kennedy has the backing of Mike Lee and also the Utah Republican Party. Meanwhile, one of his main challengers, Stuart PA, has the backing of Mitt Romney and Chris Stewart. So that's all you need to know about him. So we can hope that he does not win. Mike Kennedy has been raising well in the race. He's raised over $500,000, and he has spent $400,000 of that money, while Stuart PA is really doing quite poor in the fundraising, so that's a very good thing. Although 2 other candidates, Casey Lawrence and Rod Bird, have raised almost $3 million and over $1 million respectively, which is more than even Kennedy has raised. So they might have the bankroll to do very well in this primary. Only time will tell. And there have been no primary polls from this race, as far as I can tell. So it's really anyone's game, anyone's ball game, who wins this primary. I hope it's Mike Kennedy. He seems to be the most solid option, most conservative candidate in this race. So I definitely would pull for him. And in the 4th district, as a side note, Burgess Owens is the only candidate. He's the incumbent. He's the de facto nominee. He will go on to win this seat. It was previously a toss-up district, but it became more Republican after redistricting. And he probably is the best rep from Utah, although that's not saying much because they're all pretty mediocre. But overall, he has a solid voting record, and he will go on to win renomination and win re-election. Now moving over to these statewide races, of which there are 3 that we will talk about. First being the Senate race to replace Mitt Romney. And we have John Curtis, who is the current U.S. representative from the 3rd Congressional District we talked about. We have Trent Staggs, the mayor of Riverton, Utah, who is the most conservative America First candidate in this race. We have a more minor candidate in Jason Moulton, and we have also Brad Wilson, who is the former Speaker of the Utah State House. He is also pretty conservative, but I prefer Trent Staggs in this race. And Staggs won the convention vote against Curtis resoundingly, 70% to 30% in the final round. But unfortunately, in the primary polling, once again, Utah voters are choosing the worst possible option, at least according to the latest polls, as John Curtis has led all of them. And in the only June poll, with undecideds, he has 34% to Trent Staggs' 16%, but when the undecided vote is forced to choose candidates, Curtis goes up 47 to 21%. And Brad Wilson actually gets more of the vote than Staggs does. I wish Brad Wilson had dropped out and endorsed Trent Staggs, because it gives Trent Staggs a hard time at victory here, because it splits the conservative vote. Both Staggs and Wilson are more conservative. John Curtis is the establishment candidate in this race. So he is very favored for that reason, and it's really unfortunate. So nothing against Wilson, but I wish he had just taken one for the team. And we can see in the fundraising, Trent Staggs also has the lowest fundraising numbers. He hasn't even spent $1 million on the race. Meanwhile, Curtis has spent $3.6 million on this race, and Brad Wilson has spent almost $4.5 million. And this is also unfortunate because as far as the endorsements go, we can see John Curtis here is getting all the classic bad endorsements. Blake Moore, Chris Stewart, the former establishment representative from the 2nd District, and just a bunch of Republican political action committees that usually endorse the more establishment option. Meanwhile, Trent Staggs got the endorsement of Donald Trump, as we can see right here, which was a very, very good endorsement by him. So it's unfortunate that a good endorsement from Trump might go to waste because there is another candidate in this primary that is splitting the conservative vote with Staggs, which might push Curtis over the top more than likely, which would be a disaster because John Curtis is himself a disaster. He's been a horrible representative ever since he got into office. We can even see here, this paragraph sums up about him. He's a former Democrat who is generally considered to be a moderate Republican. He's a chairman of the Conservative Climate Caucus. He's a big climate change guy. He's a member of the centrist Republican governance group. He does not support Donald Trump and is a self-described ardent supporter of Nikki Haley. Just like Blake Moore, he voted for the Respect for Marriage Act and is generally considered to have, quote, positions as similar to current Senator Mitt Romney's on the issues. So we're getting rid of Mitt Romney. We have a chance to get a massive upgrade in Utah, and we might just replace Mitt Romney with a carbon copy of Mitt Romney. He will undermine Donald Trump's immigration agenda if elected, and will just be added to the collection of Senate and Utah rhinos that exists in our government. And that would be a very negative thing, especially when you have Trent Staggs as another option, who is exactly what he says on his page, a proven fighter. He is very conservative in both action, messaging, and policy. He would be a great ally to Donald Trump if elected. He fought back against lockdowns and mandates during COVID. He fought back against high-density, low-income, affordable housing that is becoming a real problem in states and cities all across America. He cut taxes by millions when he was mayor. He fought for the pro-life issue. He battled ESG in his home area. He fought against the indoctrination in the school system and has a tough on crime, tough on illegal immigration approach. He would be a perfect ally for Trump. And Trump, to his credit, is really backing Staggs. He endorsed him a couple months ago, early on. Unfortunately, because Brad Wilson's involvement in the primary, being the other conservative, is splitting the vote, it hasn't given Staggs that much momentum. But Trump went out of his way today to go out and reiterate his endorsement for Staggs to try and give him a boost ahead of the primary.
It's my great honor to fully endorse Mayor Trent Staggs. He's a fantastic person running for the seat of one of the worst senators in the history of the Republican Party, Mitt Romney.
So there you have it. He's really trying to give Staggs a boost. I hope he even goes so far as to maybe do an impromptu rally a day or two before the primary this coming Tuesday on June 25th. But we'll have to see. So hopefully the endorsement of Trump is able to give Staggs a boost, but it's not looking good right now, unfortunately. I wish it was, because Staggs seems like a phenomenal candidate and Curtis is the complete opposite. But hopefully we get pleasantly surprised. In the race for governor, the current incumbent governor, Spencer Cox, is running for re-election, and he is a very liberal, woke Republican. It's absolutely insane. He is supportive of the LGBTQ movement. He supports and uses pronouns, and he was the first governor to acknowledge and recognize officially Pride Month in Utah. But a state representative, Phil Lyman, is running against him from the right, is trying to mount a serious primary challenge to him. He did win the convention vote, getting over 2/3 of the vote against Cox. But Spencer Cox obviously has the edge as the incumbent. He has statewide name recognition. He's raised and spent 5 times what Phil Lyman has spent, and is obviously clobbering him in the polls. The most recent one, which is the best for Lyman, has Cox up 62-25. So even if all the undecided vote went to Phil Lyman, he still will lose by a lot. So it's not looking good at an upgrade for the governorship. but we'll just have to see and watch the results when they come in on election night. And Spencer Cox has actually signed on to a decent amount of good bills that the legislature has sent to his desk, but it's not nearly good enough to make up for him acting and sounding like a governor from California. And finally, in the Attorney General race in Utah, it's a three-way race between Derek Brown, a former state representative and the former chair of the Utah State Republican Party, Frank Mylar, the assistant attorney general and a candidate for attorney general back all the way in 2000, and Rachel Terry, director of the Utah Division of Risk Management and also assistant attorney general. Other candidates were in the race, but they were beaten out in the convention, and we can see the endorsements here. Both Mylar and Rachel Terry have been endorsed by the Utah Republican Party. Ken Paxton, the superb Texas Attorney General, has also endorsed Rachel Terry, so that's a vote of confidence for her. And meanwhile, Derek Brown has a mixed bag of Spencer Cox and Mike Lee, two polar opposites on the issues, and as far as how conservative they are, so I'm not really sure to make of how Derek Brown would be. From what I know of the candidates, I think all of them have their pros and cons, so it will be interesting to see who wins this race and assess how good the next Attorney General in Utah will be, because whoever will be nominated will go on to win. This will be a safe Republican race in November. So there you have it. Some interesting races are going down in Utah this coming Tuesday. Some potentially big primaries against incumbents in the 1st and 2nd districts for the House. Hopefully Mike Kennedy, the conservative candidate in the 3rd district, is able to pull that one out. A primary challenge against the current governor is going on, an open race for Attorney General. But the biggest of all is for the United States Senate to try and block John Curtis from being Romney 2.0. I did slam Trump in my last video for his poor endorsement record recently, but big props to him for really going out there and trying to push Trent Staggs over the finish line. So I hope Utah Republican voters get out there and vote for Trent Staggs and make Trump's efforts worthwhile.